Ever feel like kind of stuck when you're trying to figure out the best way to get somewhere? Like, is it really worth getting caught in all that traffic just to save a little time? Or should I just, I don't know, hop on a plane and not feel so bad about it? You know, you guys have given us this whole stack of sources about all these different ways people get around. And so today we're going to unpack them, not just like the how they work part, but also like, what are the questions we should even be asking ourselves when we're making these choices, you know?
Yeah, it's more than just like getting from point A to point B, right?
Right.
It's really about trying to weigh those pros and cons, understanding like the impact each choice has.
Mm-hmm.
And not just on like our wallets, but our time, maybe even, the planet as a whole.
Totally. So, okay, let's start simple. Walking. I mean, seems obvious, but one of our sources actually got into some of the surprising benefits, and I'm not even just talking about like for our bodies, but also how walkable a city is. It actually like reflects some bigger issues.
What I find so fascinating about that is that walking, while it seems like, basic, it kind of forces us to think about accessibility in a different way. Like if the sidewalks and crosswalks aren't designed in a way that really works for everyone, people with disabilities, seniors, even parents pushing strollers,
yeah,
it actually starts to limit people's independence in a major way. And did you know there's this whole history of like pedestrian rights activism? Like people literally had to fight for safer, more inclusive streets.
Wow. See, I never even thought about that, but you're right. It makes you realize that something as simple as taking a walk, it really is more of a privilege for some than others. Okay, so if we're thinking like walking is like level one, bikes kind of feel like that next step up, right? And our source really highlighted how eco-friendly they are, which makes sense. I mean, no exhaust pipe. But I'm curious, like how much of a difference does that actually make? Is it really that big of a deal?
Oh, it's pretty significant when you add it all up. I mean, think about it this way, okay? The average car, it emits roughly 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide every single year. Bikes, 0. But it's not, it's not just about that individual impact, right? Our source mentioned bike lanes, of course, but like a truly robust cycling infrastructure, it also means things like bike sharing programs, which can be total game changers, especially for folks who maybe can't afford their own bike or even just, want to try it out before they fully commit to buying one.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a whole ecosystem you got to think about, not just like, sticking a bike path here and there and calling it a day. But, we got to be real for a sec. Some people, they find cycling kind of scary,
Yeah.
Sharing the road with cars, all that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's totally valid. Safety is like paramount, right? That's why we have things like helmet laws, even though those are, sometimes debated. They exist to protect riders. Yeah. But I think even with those in place, it just highlights how much our individual choices like intersect with this broader responsibility we all have to each other. Like car drivers need to be super aware of cyclists. Cyclists need to obviously follow the rules of the road. I mean, it's this shared space, literally.
Yeah, it's like that saying, it takes a village, or in this case, the city, to make transportation work well for everybody. Okay, so I think it's time to address the elephant in the room, or should I say the gas guzzler in the garage. Cars. Super convenient. Our source definitely acknowledges that, but they're also, I mean, they're major polluters, let's be honest. So is there like any way to have our cake and eat it too, like to enjoy that convenience, but do it in a way that's, better for the environment?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Yeah. Our source did mention carpooling, which when it works out logistically for people can be great. I mean, fewer cars on the road means fewer emissions overall. But I also think like technology is kind of changing the game here too, right? Electric cars are they're becoming increasingly common, and even the the traditional car manufacturers, they're being held to much stricter fuel efficiency standards these days.
So it's got to be this combination of like the individual choices that we make, like carpooling or switching to electric, but then also those like bigger systemic changes like the regulations, the tech advancements, all that.
Exactly. It's a multi-layered challenge, and I don't think there's ever going to be like a one-size-fits-all solution, which actually I think that's a good segue into talking about our next mode of transportation, buses. They're often cheaper than driving solo. Our source pointed that out, but time is also a factor, right? So is that like the ultimate trade-off, your money or your minutes?
Yeah, because nobody wants to spend like their whole life commuting, right? And our source, it briefly touched on how public transit is funded, which I have to admit, I don't really know anything about that. So I'd love to like understand a bit more about how that whole system actually works.
Yeah, so it's definitely different from like personal vehicles where, you're essentially paying for gas and upkeep directly. Public transit, it relies on this mix of fares from riders and often subsidies from the government. And this is really crucial because it helps keep those ticket prices lower than they would have to be if they were just relying on, fares alone. Now, how those fares are structured, that can vary a lot. Some cities will have a flat fee no matter how far you're going, while others charge based on the distance traveled.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just as simple as like, oh, the bus is cheaper than driving your car. It's like this whole web of funding and pricing strategies to try and make it accessible to as many people as possible.
Exactly.
Which actually brings up that term from our source, time poverty. What does that even mean, and how does it apply in this whole transportation conversation?
So time poverty is that feeling of being constantly short on time. Like you're always rushing, you never have enough time for anything. And in the context of transportation, it means that even if taking the bus is technically cheaper, if it takes you twice as long to get to work or to school or wherever you're going, is that saved money really worth the extra time that you're losing?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's like choosing between an extra hour of sleep or an extra hour at work, right? It's a very personal calculation.
Yeah.
Speaking of speed, though, our source also mentioned high-speed trains, which they sound super cool and futuristic. But are those like a realistic option for everyday travel for most people, or is it more of a luxury thing?
You've hit on a really, really crucial point there. Yeah. And that is feasibility. High-speed trains can be amazing. They're a fantastic alternative to air travel, especially when we're talking about longer distances. Yeah. They can carry a ton of people, and they have the potential to be way more eco-friendly than planes.
Yeah.
But they need massive, and I mean massive, investment in infrastructure. We're talking dedicated tracks, often new construction, which gets really, really expensive. And then even when you have all that, they still operate on fixed routes, right? So while they're fantastic for getting you from city A to city B super fast, they might not work so well for getting around within those cities or for getting to smaller towns that are kind of off the beaten path.
So it's not just about whether the technology exists, right? It's whether it's actually accessible and practical for most people on a daily basis.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us back to this idea that there's rarely a single best way to travel. It always depends on the specific circumstances and really weighing those trade-offs is key.
Yeah. No, it really is. It's almost like you have to have this mental checklist, right? Before you even leave the house. Distance, cost, time, impact, all of that stuff. We were just talking about impact, so I think it's time to talk about planes. They're definitely like the speed demons of the transportation world.
Right.
But our source mentioned that they also come with, a pretty hefty price tag. So what is it that makes flying so expensive? Is it just because it feels kind of fancy?
Well, I think it's easy to associate air travel with luxury.
Right.
Right. Especially if you're thinking about first class and all that. But I think that the reality is it's a lot more about physics and economics. You got to think about it. Planes require a massive, massive amount of fuel to get those heavy metal birds off the ground and then obviously keep them soaring across, entire continents. And fuel, as we all know, is not cheap.
Right.
And then on top of that, airlines also have to factor in things like crew salaries, airport fees, and then there's those pesky little things called supply and demand.
Right.
So, the more people that want to fly on a specific route, especially during peak travel seasons, the higher those prices are going to climb.
Yeah, totally. Like those crazy expensive plane tickets you got to buy if you want to go home for the holidays. But you know what our source didn't even mention? Budget airlines.
Oh, right.
Those have really shaken things up, at least in terms of affordability.
Oh, absolutely. Budget airlines have been a total game changer for making air travel accessible to way more people. And they can do that because they cut costs in, a bunch of different ways, offering fewer frills, maybe less leg room, no free snacks. They often fly to smaller, less congested airports, which can save money as well. So while that, that first class ticket, that might still scream luxury, flying itself has become a lot more attainable than it used to be. And it's, thanks in part to those budget-friendly options.
It's like choosing between a fancy restaurant and just grabbing takeout, right? Sometimes you want the whole experience, the fancy plates, the cloth napkins, but sometimes you just need to get from point A to point B, without totally breaking the bank.
Right.
Speaking of getting things from point A to point B, our source also mentioned boats. And I'm not talking about like the kind you take on vacation. Apparently they're actually crucial for transporting goods all over the world. And I have to admit, like, I'm picturing giant cargo planes, but like on water. Am I even close?
Oh, you're actually closer than you might think. It's called container shipping, and it's really pretty mind-boggling when you start to think about the scale of it. I mean, those massive cargo ships that you see, like you said, they're like floating cities. They carry like everything you can imagine. Clothes, electronics, food, raw materials, you name it, it's probably been on a ship, and they're going across oceans, waterways all over the world. It's easy to forget about because most of us, aren't shipping giant containers of stuff. We're focused on passenger travel. But container shipping it's like the backbone of global trade.
Wow. I never really considered like how much of what I own has probably been on a ship at some point. That's incredible. Okay, shifting gears to a mode of transportation that's definitely more about the thrill than the like practicality of it. At least that's how our source made it seem. Motorcycles, right?
They called them like exciting, but they
Mm.
also pointed out the obvious dangers. So is it purely a recreational choice, or is there like more to motorcycles than meets the eye?
I think you've hit on a common misconception there. While motorcycles are undoubtedly like exhilarating to ride, and a lot of people use them for leisure, that open road, feeling the wind in their hair,
Yeah.
there is a really practical side to them too, especially when we're talking about densely populated areas, urban areas. Because of their like agility and their size, they can actually navigate traffic jams way easier than cars.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
And parking, forget about it. You're not circling the block for hours trying to find a spot. Motorcycles can fit into spaces that like cars could only dream of.
And in some cities, they're even being used for delivery services because they're so efficient and maneuverable.
So it's like they offer this like unique combination of like personal freedom, but also practicality, depending on, the context like we've been talking about.
Exactly.
But as our source mentioned, there are, some inherent risks.
Oh, absolutely. Safety it's paramount when you're riding a motorcycle. You're much more vulnerable than you are when you're in a car. So, wearing the proper gear, adhering to all traffic laws, that's crucial. It's just a mode of transportation that demands a lot of respect and vigilance.
So, okay, with all of these amazing transportation options, walking, biking, driving, flying, even sailing across the ocean, like how on earth do you actually choose?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And as we've been talking about, there's no single right answer, is there? It all comes back to like understanding the context of your journey, of your life. What are your priorities? What are the trade-offs that you're willing to make?
It's true. And you know what? It just occurred to me, it's almost like each mode of transportation has like its own personality,
Hmm.
And we're drawn to the ones that maybe like match our needs and our values at that moment in time. And our source, they did a great job of really breaking down the how of getting around all the nuts and bolts, but it's got me thinking about like the why now. Does our choice of transportation, does that actually say something deeper about us, do you think?
Ooh, that is a really, really intriguing question. I mean, do we prioritize speed and efficiency above all else? Like, are we always opting for the quickest route, even if it means, more emissions, more congestion, or do we value sustainability and community? So we're choosing to walk, bike, take public transportation, those kinds of things. I think our choices can definitely reflect our values, our priorities, maybe even our aspirations in some ways. Like someone who, loves the open road, the feeling of freedom that you get from riding a motorcycle, they're going to make very different transportation choices than someone who, really prioritizes safety and predictability above all else.
And it's not always like a conscious decision either, right? Sometimes it's just like a matter of what's actually available, what's accessible to you in that moment. Like if you live in a city that like doesn't have great public transportation options, owning a car might just feel like the only viable option, even if like deep down you would prefer something greener,
Absolutely. And that's such a crucial point,
Yeah.
Access and infrastructure, they play a huge role in shaping our choices.
Yeah.
A city that's designed for cars is like, it's going to incentivize driving, right? Whereas the city that has like robust public transportation, safe bike lanes, pedestrian-friendly streets, it's naturally going to encourage those modes of transportation instead.
Yeah.
So sometimes, it's not just about our personal preferences, it's about the systems and the structures that are already in place.
It's so true, which kind of makes me think about like the future, right? Our source was very focused on how we get around today, but with like technology advancing at like lightning speed these days, who even knows what transportation is going to look like in the next decade? Right. Or even further out than that. Are we all going to be like zipping around in flying cars, teleporting to our destinations?
Ooh, imagine that.
Right.
But the future of transportation is full of these exciting, kind of mind-blowing possibilities. I mean, we're already seeing like the rise of electric vehicles, autonomous driving technology. There's even talk about these like hyperloop systems that would like revolutionize high-speed travel. It's a super dynamic field, and it has the potential to like fundamentally change how we connect with each other and with the world around us.
It really does. This whole deep dive has really, it's given me a whole new perspective on something that I thought I knew a lot about. It's not just about getting from point A to point B. It's about the choices that we make and how those choices, they really do shape like the world around us, from like our own personal health and well-being to like the environment and even, the fabric of our communities.
I couldn't agree more. It's about understanding those trade-offs like we keep talking about, considering, the impact, not just for ourselves, but for everyone, and maybe even like challenging our own assumptions a little bit about what's possible.
So the next time you're, planning a trip, whether it's like a quick walk around the block or a flight across the ocean, just take a moment to like appreciate this whole complex and honestly kind of fascinating world of transportation that makes it all possible. And hey, if you ever find yourself, having a late night debate about the merits of high-speed rail versus budget airlines, you know where to find us. We're always up for another deep dive.